Meanwhile, the man was in complete shock when he heard that she was going to take a walk around the city. The lady reminded him that he had said it was dangerous, but if there were several people accompanying them, everything would go smoothly. After a moment of hesitation, he reluctantly agreed. Lizelle was very grateful and quickly thanked him, saying she would be on her way. The Duke, however, realized that she had deliberately put him in an awkward position in front of the butler, especially after he had initially refused her. She was certainly clever. Elle was overjoyed. "Mom, look at all the toys!" he exclaimed, rushing ahead. The boy was so excited that he even called her Mum. Lizelle reminded him not to run too far ahead. She thought they were simply going for a walk, but she hadn't realized how much of a spender the boy was. She only had 1,000 shillings, and now she was already considering selling her necklace to cover the cost. The girl offered him something sweet, and he happily accepted. Lizelle was relieved that everything had worked out without much financial strain, but suddenly a thief appeared behind her. The lady screamed, urging the guards to catch him. Elle was stunned, but Lizelle quickly noticed the thief and shouted for help. Knight rushed to her side, instructing her to stand behind him. Another knight remarked that the thief was fast, so much so that they couldn't catch him. The lady, frustrated and upset, was reassured by one of the knights who said he would check on her condition, but in the meantime she should stay with the other knight. Lizelle's safety was clearly a priority, but the knight asked if she was okay and assured her that his friends would bring her purse back soon. Elle, undeterred, told Lizelle that he would protect her and instructed her to stand behind him. Just as he spoke, the thief tried to escape, but Lizelle grabbed the boy in her arms and called for the knight. The knight, with swift reflexes, tripped the thief, causing him to fall. Lizelle hoped that this wasn't just some kind of time traveler's rule, where the hero always has to be the one to make the dramatic move. She was glad the situation had turned out in their favor, but she was still nervous. Elle, noticing something on the ground near the thief, reached out to touch it, but Lizelle quickly stopped him. "Don't touch anything," she said, walking ahead to check on her belongings. Kay, the knight who had chased the thief, asked his partner why he hadn't caught up with the thief. The partner explained that the thief was simply too fast, and once he realized he couldn't catch him, he turned back. Lizelle was grateful, though she downplayed it, saying it was just a coincidence. Still, it had been a relief to get her bag back. Afterward, she quickly snatched the bag from the child's hands. Lizelle thought she could have done it more carefully, as she almost tore the boy's arm off in her haste over the unfortunate bag. The woman then decided to offer Lizelle some jewelry, claiming it was a gesture of gratitude. She insisted that Lizelle take it, saying she wanted her to wear it for her health before running off immediately. The necklace seemed expensive, and everything about the situation felt suspicious. Lizelle couldn't help but wonder. After all, not all aristocrats carry spare diamonds in their handbags for emergencies. Even the thief had acted clumsily. The woman thanked Lizelle, not the knight who had tried to help her, which seemed odd. Perhaps the necklace was cursed, she mused. Elle suggested they go another way, pointing out that something interesting was happening there. Everything seemed so shiny. Lizelle was caught between the temptation to sell the necklace or keep it. It was hard to resist her natural greed. Elle, on the other hand, was delighted to see a real star. The seller, noticing their interest, said this was the last music box and offered to sell it for only 1,000 shillings. Lizelle noted how difficult it would be for a beggar, especially one with a child in her arms, to turn down such an offer. Her heart would break with every refusal. Elle asked if they could have it, and she decided to sell the necklace. The buyer informed her that the diamonds were fake, but he could still buy it, though the price would be much lower. Lizelle felt a twinge of sadness that the diamonds were fake. But at least they could live comfortably now. 2,000 shillings for a beautiful design wasn't so bad. Elle, curious, asked why she was so happy. Lizelle explained that they were going to buy him a star, and that's why she was pleased. She also decided they should spend all the money, so she ordered drinks for everyone at her expense. Everyone was happy, and it was clear how easily money could lift people's spirits. Meanwhile, the masked man was horrified when he found out she had sold the necklace. He threw his glass at the servants, furious. They apologized, explaining they hadn't anticipated this outcome. He yelled at them to be quiet, saying they didn't understand how rare the magic stones in the necklace were. They needed to retrieve it immediately. The man, in a panic, rushed out of the room, lamenting how insane it was to sell such a rare item so carelessly. He stressed that she should have worn it, as it met all the beauty standards for the season. His servant asked if he should handle the situation, but the man responded, stating they should wait for her to wear it. They needed to keep an eye on her house. Who knew what she might do with the stone neck? The servant agreed, remarking that her actions were quite unpredictable. The master, after a moment, decided to send his servant off to deal with it. He instructed the servant to bring him good news, and they would await the results. Meanwhile, Lizelle was feeding the boy in the garden when the servant reported to the master. So far, nothing unusual had been noticed about her. She cared for the child, and there was no sign of violence. However, a small incident had occurred a few days ago, where she had instructed the servants to prioritize Lizzelle's interests above their own. Something else interesting had come up during the inspection of the Baron. The Duke wanted to get straight to the point. Just before his arrival, the lady had sold all her luxurious dresses and accessories to help the Baron pay off his debts. The butler wasn't sure that a vulgar girl, someone who gossiped, could do something like that. Perhaps she had changed. Chester, frustrated, remarked that the servant was too trusting and should believe him. People don't change for no reason. But the servant urged the master to consider his words carefully. There was a possibility that the rumours were greatly exaggerated. Even the most obvious lie could seem true if enough people repeated it. After a while, Chester looked again at the girl and the boy in the garden. He remarked that it was too early to draw conclusions and that they couldn't take their eyes off her. Rand, however, knew that no matter how long he stared, he wouldn't see anything new. She was a different kind of star. A spotless sun. The master didn't understand why his servant was so fixated, but he said he was already on his way. Lizelle was playing hide-and-seek with the boy, shouting that if anyone didn't hide, it wasn't her fault. She thought he was such a sweet boy, especially with those tiny, adorable feet. She pretended not to know where he had gone, looking around and acting like she couldn't see him. It seemed like he had run in the opposite direction, but she knew she had to teach him how to hide properly, just in case he wanted to irritate the Duke. Lizelle said she would look one way, then check under the chair. L'Appel knew he couldn't let that happen. If she found him there, she'd win again. So, he decided he would definitely win this time. Lizelle offered him a head start and started counting to 100. L'Appel understood he had to run faster, but had no idea where he could hide. Rand turned to the boy and asked if he was in a hurry to do something important. L'Appel was overjoyed to see the butler and asked if he could help him hide. Rand realized that he was playing hide-and-seek with Lizelle, who was notorious for being a hide monster. The butler agreed to help and said they'd come up with something. Maybe he could just carry L'Appel in his arms, since Lizelle was short and might not even notice him, but L'Appel figured that wouldn't work. They might be better off hiding in the living room or library, or maybe they could go full speed ahead. L'Appel quickly decided they should go full speed ahead. Then he realized he needed to be quieter. Lizelle would be coming soon. Lizelle noticed that it had become unusually quiet. The butler did everything L'Appel asked. The cook, however, yelled at him to slow down, warning him that the floors had just been mopped and he might fall. Lan called out to L'Appel, urging him to listen to the warnings, or he could get hurt. L'Appel, however, shouted back that he didn't care because he had just beaten Lizelle in hide-and-seek. Meanwhile, the men tried to catch up with L'Appel, but they slipped. Ran couldn't understand why they had decided to wash the floors at that moment. The butler had fallen hard, and L'Appel drew attention to him, but the gentleman reassured him that he was fine. Moles told the gentleman to be careful since there was a flower on the ground, but it was too late. L'Appel, however, was delighted by the sight. It was like summer snow. They continued playing with the little gentleman, and Lizelle had no idea where he could have disappeared to. She was sure she'd heard his voice nearby, but he wasn't in the living room. It was tricky. She thought maybe he was in the library. She'd have to search quietly, or else he might have hidden too well. The library was huge, making it difficult for her to search effectively. Suddenly, she noticed the key to her successful and happy life. The Duke was reading a book. Lizelle thought to herself that he was a man among men. If he could carry such a large ladder by himself, she would have hired someone to do it. It was almost as if there was a new medieval profession, ladder mover. But for something like this, what wouldn't you do? It must be fate. She asked him to continue showing the way to her wayward newcomer. There it was, the key to the happy life of a strong and independent woman. The book was called How to Turn 1,000 into 10 Billion Shillings. Given the characters of the Hyos brothers, it was unlikely they would have bought a useless book. Now it seemed possible to increase her capital. Lizelle decided she would pay off her debts, and the remaining 20 million that the Duke would give her would multiply many times over. Then, she would be able to live her own life. Suddenly, Lizelle began to fall, but surprisingly, it wasn't painful. It felt almost pleasant, as though she were being caught by someone. She realized Chester had caught her. He was so handsome, like a sculpture. And for some reason, her heart skipped a beat. This was crazy. She was losing her rationality. It was so much easier to think clearly about a 2D man when she was in her world and he was in his. The lady began to apologize, asking him to let her go. She needed to act as though she were ashamed, lowering her head so she wouldn't seem impudent. He looked down at her, his gaze almost detached, like he was examining his hand. It irritated her that he interfered even when she was busy with important things. Afterward, she apologized for looking in there without permission, explaining that she thought the boy might be hiding there. Chester pointed out that he hadn't come in yet. Lizelle quickly put the book down and began to leave, saying goodbye as she approached the door. Chester noticed that she couldn't lie convincingly. She had been in his head when she fell into his arms. This confused him, and he found himself wondering why he was remembering her face. He decided to see what kind of book she had been holding to her chest. When he saw it, he realized it was some kind of nonsense, not a book on investing at all. It had to be thrown out immediately. After reading a couple of paragraphs, Chester hoped that Lizelle wasn't acting this way because of the book. He couldn't believe he even considered the possibility that someone could become a billionaire just by reading something like that. Lizelle was embarrassed, especially since he was still holding her and her heartbeat quickened. She didn't understand why this was happening. He was absolutely unbearable. Louise's laughter echoed, but this was the kitchen, and she hoped he wasn't alone there. Lizelle entered the kitchen, saying she had found it, and then she was very surprised. She asked the butler if everything was okay. Elle called her to play with them. The lady was grateful they had been with him this whole time, and noted that she saw they had also been part of the battle with flour. She apologized, but they didn't mind. They were happy themselves. Elle, being the mischievous boy he was, played with the flour, and then immediately went to bed. Lizelle couldn't even be mad at him, because he was just so sweet. The cat overheard the knights talking about who would be the first to enter. "Kay is so tired he needs to go to bed quickly," one knight said. Suddenly, they heard a strange crunch in the bushes. When they turned around, they saw a very cute cat. The knight apologized, but the cat couldn't stay there, so he decided to find its owner. After a huge burst of light, the cat possessed the knight, with the help of magic. Chester was in such a hurry that even his butler couldn't keep up with him. He quickly called Shane, who was surprised to see the gentleman had decided to meet them personally. Ran noted that Chester was so eager to hear the report that he came himself. The Duke immediately asked what had happened and told them to get to the point. Shane apologized, explaining that they had thoroughly searched all the way from Bern to the capital, but they had found nothing. Chester acknowledged their hard work and told them they could rest. Shane then suggested they expand the search area, but Chester said they should rest for now, because they would need strength for further searches. Shane understood and agreed to wait until they were needed. Ran pointed out that the killer must have planned everything carefully, since there were no clues. Chester agreed. They would need time and effort to solve this puzzle. He was also pleased when he saw Warden. The servant mentioned he would return the dog to the kennel, but Chester hugged the dog and said there was no need. "This little one has worked hard. You can't just shove him in," he said. So, the gentleman decided to walk with the dog for a bit. Chester then ordered Ran to arrange some delicacies for the dogs. The night Kay was called and told they needed to patrol the house. He thought they were still looking for clues. After the guest's arrival today, plans had changed and they had to hurry. The gentleman noted that he had seen his pet enjoying the walk. Chester also apologized for having to stay indoors, as they had guests and his dog might scare them. He mentioned that the dog would need to wait a little longer until the identity of the boy was established. He recalled Leon asking Chester if he could handle Dobermans. Considering they were such a large breed, Chester's efforts had been thorough, and though he was a little busy now, they would walk later. If this boy was truly Lapel, Chester would introduce them, and he would be happy to learn that his son had made a friend. Chester offered the dog something to eat and asked him to sit still. He promised to return soon, hoping the dog wouldn't be too upset about being locked in again. He noticed a woman having lunch with a child, treating him very well and praising him for eating his carrots. The woman remarked on how unusual it was, as it was always so quiet here. If he ever had a family, he imagined it might look something like that. Chester felt a bit out of place here, and it was time for him to leave. Lizelle decided to ask if his lordship had eaten yet. Chester admitted that he hadn't. Lizelle understood, though she didn't quite understand why he seemed so worried. After this, the chef presented the final dessert, and the boy was thrilled with it. Since he had already been noticed, there was no point in trying to escape quickly. The cook was glad to see his master. Ran informed him that the Duke needed raw chicken, and it had already been prepared. Lizelle asked for a moment to think. She was surprised, but realized that if she had such tastes, she'd be concerned too. Chester, puzzled by her sly look, hinted that they should leave to enjoy their chicken in peace. He began to prepare to leave. Chester noticed that Lizelle hadn't eaten, as she had been feeding the baby. He suddenly dropped by and asked her to finish her meal. Lizelle said she was already full and suggested he sit and enjoy the food. Chester said he would take the jacket with him, but Lizelle called out to him before he left. She told him that it was better not to eat raw meat, which surprised him. It was close to poisoning, and he needed to stay healthy. After Lapel's comment, the Duke had no idea what she was talking about. Lizelle said that it was better to cook the chicken, boil it, fry it, or stew it, but just don't eat it raw. She added that she didn't blame him if he didn't know and wished him a pleasant appetite. Chester couldn't believe she thought he had asked for raw chicken for himself. This made him laugh. He noted that the more you got to know her, the more interesting she became. It simply couldn't be true. But it was. He had seen it with his own eyes. The guy said he must have mixed something up. The butler arrived and asked if the list of dishes for the week had been approved. Ran, confused by the atmosphere, thought something was off. The chef, wanting to tease the cook, remarked that he had seen the Duke laughing. The butler noted that this sometimes happened, and fortunately the Duke knew how to smile. But it wasn't just a smile. Chester had ordered the chicken for the dog, and the laughter echoed from the dining room. The chef, who had returned to make sure it was really him, heard the laughter and couldn't believe it. Ran asked if the laughter was really loud. It was the first time the chef had seen such a thing since he started his job. He thought the palace might be in disbelief too. The chef was stunned, but he said he'd beat the butler if he didn't understand. It was hard to believe, but the laughter was real and it had lightened the atmosphere in the house. Perhaps this was affecting the Duke. Lizelle, unsure where the boy was running, told him he might trip. Lapel told her not to worry. It was better to hurry. He was always so energetic. After eating, it was hard to keep up with kids his age. Lapel stumbled, but Lizelle said it was okay. The boy immediately started rolling on the floor. Lizelle rushed to him and asked if he was hurt or had any scratches. The boy assured her he was fine and stood up on his own. They had just bathed and combed his hair, and now he was dirty again, with blades of grass stuck in his hair. It was true that every day for a parent felt like hard work. She asked him if he had fun, and the boy said he wanted to keep playing. Lizelle reminded him to be careful and not get hurt. His happiness mattered most, but he shouldn't run too far. Elle was such a fidget. Suddenly, Lizelle heard the boy calling her, his voice full of fear. When she ran up to him, she saw a huge dog in front of him. The boy was terrified and crying. Lizelle told him to stay put and that everything would be fine. She would slowly approach him, but she couldn't move, knowing that if the dog suddenly attacked, it would be the end for the boy. She had no idea what to do. The dog sniffed the boy, but when the boy screamed at it to stay away, Lizelle urged him to calm down. The dog, however, was acting wild. Without thinking, she ran to the boy, picked him up in her arms and saved him from the dog. Afterward, the Duke approached them and told Walden to stop and quickly leave. He practically ran to them and asked the lady in horror if they were okay. Chester apologized for not noticing that they had come out here. Lizelle asked Elle how he was, urging him not to cry because everything was fine now. Suddenly the lady closed her eyes, and the boy asked in fear what was wrong with her. It was the stress that had built up, causing her nerves to act up, and she had no strength left. Her body felt like a mess, but she wanted to know if the boy was okay. The Duke rushed to her and asked if she was all right. Lizelle had no idea when she'd stopped getting into awkward situations right in front of his nose. She stood up and asked the boy not to cry, also asking if he was in any pain. Lizelle then asked Chester if he had heard that the boy wasn't injured, so he didn't need to worry. Chester looked embarrassed but repeated that he had been asking about her, not the boy. Lizelle noticed that he was angry again, and she didn't understand why. It was confusing. Why did she like him so much, even when he looked so upset? If someone had seen her face, they might have thought she had pushed him away, leaving him lying there, unhappy, exhausted and angry. Ran hurried towards his master and noticed that Chester was screaming loudly. He wondered what had happened. When he saw the lady, he was told she had just fallen, but the butler couldn't understand how this had occurred. He asked if she was okay, and the Duke asked if she could get up. There were some problems. She couldn't feel her legs. Apparently her body still hadn't recovered from the shock, and she didn't think she could stand up on her own. Elle was worried because she was hurt. Ran decided to ask what had happened. Lizelle noticed the gentleman's eye twitching, and since she was the victim, she wasn't angry. She said she thought her body was still in shock, which made her legs feel heavy. She told the boy not to cry and that she would rest and soon feel better. The gentleman asked the butler to take the child and bring him to the estate, but Elle asked to stay with the lady, wanting to accompany her. Ran assured him everything was fine and that the master would help Lizelle get up. Lizelle gave him the key to stop because she would have laid down on the grass and gotten up on her own. There was no need to carry her in his arms. Chester ordered the butler to bring the doctor to the ladies' room immediately. She said she was fine, but Chester insisted on carrying her, which seemed odd to the butler. The doctor examined her legs and confirmed she was in a lot of pain. The gentleman thought it was serious, but the doctor reassured him that there was no need to worry. The bone was fine, it was just a slight sprain. She needed ice and to avoid putting any weight on her leg for a while, but it would heal soon. The doctor left and the Duke stayed in the room with her, which surprised Lizelle because it was directed mainly at him. She sat on him, falling right into his arms. She didn't understand why he was always nearby. Because of all this, she had already been in his arms twice, feeling his hard chest against her side. It was awkward, and she was mortified by the way everyone stared at them in the hallway. She felt like she would die of shame. She really wished he would put her down, as his face constantly reminded her of those. Chester turned to Lizelle and apologized, but she didn't understand why he was speaking to her in such a way. The Duke had to keep the dog on a leash, not risking the safety of his guests. He apologized again. Lizelle now knew the name of the dog, but she didn't understand why it was such a frightening creature. She reassured him that everything had turned out fine, so he didn't need to worry anymore. It was just an unfortunate situation, and the dog only wanted to protect the house. The Duke promised to compensate her for the trouble, asking how much she wanted. Lizelle jokingly asked if he could buy her a house. The Duke, in a serious tone, asked in which area she would like the house, how many rooms, and whether it should have a garden. Lizelle told him to stop, admitting she was just joking. She felt like she was living in a fairy tale. Maybe he had already become a billionaire thanks to that book, and his face promised to fulfill any of her wishes right then and there. But she couldn't take advantage of him like that. Instead, she told him to introduce her to the dog sometime. Chester was surprised by her request. Lizelle remarked that she wanted him to apologize in person. The Duke was shocked, and she said that would be more than enough. When he left, the butler asked how the lady was doing, and Chester replied that she simply couldn't walk for a few days. Ran was relieved everything worked out, but the boy screamed wanting to go to her and asked to be let go. Chester picked up the boy and told him not to worry because she would get better soon. For that to happen, he needed to stay quiet so she could rest. When she woke up, he had to protect her and make sure she didn't walk around too much. Chester asked if he could trust him with such an important task. Lizelle said he could rely on him and that the boy would protect her. Afterward, the boy ran off somewhere. Lizelle noticed that he looked a bit shabby and realized he had probably been too busy to care about his appearance because of Missy. Rowan observed how concerned his master was for her, something he never expected from Sir Chester. The gentleman was surprised by his own thoughts, and then remembered how he had asked her if she was wounded, and ordered that a doctor be brought immediately. He had also carried her in his arms. Chester ordered Ran to fetch the potion as soon as possible, no matter what. He wasn't sure what feeling had come over him recently, but he had doubts about his judgments regarding her. If his suspicions were correct, the misunderstandings between them would need to be resolved quickly. In the kitchen, the servants were discussing how she had been lying on the grass with the boy in her arms. They couldn't believe it, especially since the boy was real. If it weren't, why would she rush to save him? She even got hurt herself and was now lying in her room. But it seemed more logical to run from such a large dog, a Doberman, rather than protect her son. Regina suggested that she was a hypocrite, possibly trying to seduce the Duke by using the boy as an excuse. They should think for themselves. No noble woman would go looking for a boy in a landfill, and she couldn't have just found him by accident, since the Duke's search party had already scoured everything. The cook proposed that this was indeed the case, and the maids also thought it was a bit strange, but seemed to believe it. Regina suggested waiting for the potion to arrive and then seeing what happened. The head maid asked why they were all gathered, as they had work to do. They told her they were working, but Regina had finished everything she was assigned and asked for a short break. The maid allowed it, saying Regina deserved it for working hard. The cook then decided to get back to his tasks, as he had forgotten about the deep dishes and the first course. Soup. It was important to monitor nutrition during a visit and diversify the diet. Regina offered to help with the soup, though the cook didn't quite understand why she looked a bit off. He didn't mind, though. Lizelle had planned to handle the situation herself, but Regina didn't agree with that and was determined to get revenge. Elle, however, said no way. Then, the lady complained that she was very thirsty, but the boy wouldn't let her get up, insisting that if she did, her leg wouldn't heal. It was better for her to stay still, and he promised to bring her something to drink. Elle was careful not to spill a drop, knowing Lizelle needed water to heal. When he handed it to her, she was very grateful, but the boy refused her thanks, telling her to drink it because it would help her get better faster. Lizelle wanted to tell him that her hands were fine and she wasn't paralyzed, but he insisted on giving her the drink from his hands. She thanked him sincerely, and he was pleased. He told her to never get sick again, and she promised she wouldn't. His sweet scent intoxicated her, and she wished she could stay like this forever. But with only a few days left before their separation, she knew she had to stop dreaming about things that wouldn't come true. It seemed like it would be hard for her without him, because he was her little hero. Elle said he would protect her, just as long as she stayed close and didn't leave. Lizelle didn't understand how she would cope without him by her side. She would miss him terribly, and also Tia. Tia had become like family to her, along with Rowan, Kay, and of course the Duke. But she wondered why the Duke was on this list. He was a nice man, but she wouldn't miss him for sure. He was hard to understand. His first instinct was always to get angry with her. L'Appel told her she had wrinkles. Just then, Tia came in and informed the lady that she had brought food for both her and the boy. L'Appel asked why she even got up, since he would have fed her himself. Lizelle apologized but explained that she was feeling better, so she wanted to offer him something to eat before he insisted on feeding her again. She had to eat it quickly before he started insisting, and when she tasted the soup, she thought it had about 1 pound of salt for every litre of water. Lizelle's face remained unchanged. Perhaps someone had accidentally dropped too much salt in her dish, but she decided that no one had ever died from too much salt. She ate the soup anyway. Meanwhile, Hazen was supposed to report the situation through his magic ruby. He looked like the baby of the family, but he wasn't entirely sure yet. The potion hadn't arrived at the mansion, and the gentleman told him to continue observing and report anything important. Tia noticed the lady staring at the sky for a long time and asked what was wrong. Lizelle said it was nothing special. She just hadn't looked at the sky in a long time and couldn't help but admire it. Tia was surprised, noting that the view from the window was beautiful, but Lizelle said it wasn't the real sky. What she saw from her room wasn't the same. She must have been sad there. At least she had a reliable guard who wouldn't let her lift her finger. Lizelle didn't understand why the Duke doubted their relationship, because they behaved so similarly. Tia was glad she had recovered so quickly. It was just a sprain, so Lizelle was happy everything was healing well. It felt wonderful to expose her face to the light breeze. After so many days of confinement, it suddenly became much colder, and the lady realized she had dressed too lightly. She suggested that the boy go inside, but L'Appel said it was warm. Tia offered to bring her a cape, but Lizelle assured her it wasn't necessary, as she would get it herself. It was good for her to move around more now. L'Appel said he could play with the maid for now. When Lizelle took the oath, she felt so warm and soft. She decided to take something for the boy, just in case. The staircase had seemed too wide in the beginning, but she had grown used to it. It felt like this was her home, and she needed to hurry, because her own plans were probably already in motion. No matter whose little pranks they were, they wouldn't spoil her wonderful mood. Tomorrow, she was meeting the gentleman, and he remarked that he had heard she was feeling better. Lizelle confirmed this and said she was planning to take a walk. The gentleman agreed. Lizelle was very happy to see the Duke's dog near him, whom she had wanted to meet. Chester asked her to wait because he had prepared something for her. The dog brought her a flower and placed it next to her. Lizelle was very grateful to the dog and then asked the Duke if she could pet him. Chester allowed it, but told her to approach slowly. Lizelle was sure everything would be fine. The dog seemed like a well-behaved boy, but there's no such thing as too much caution. She was grateful for the trust he had shown and suggested that they forget the past incident and become friends. Even the Doberman had given her a flower. Not everyone could boast of that. But of course, the dog wouldn't have thought of doing that on his own, so most likely the Duke had rehearsed this with him. Lizelle didn't understand why he had done it. A simple apology would have sufficed. She hadn't thought the Duke could be so romantic. Perhaps something had really changed in his gaze. Chester's gaze softened, and then the Duke asked if she had anything to say. Lizelle immediately replied that she wanted to thank him. She remembered that he was thick-skinned and that she shouldn't have stared, as he might still think something of it. Lizelle noted that he could continue his walk, but she was already leaving. Chester asked the dog what was wrong. He assumed the dog was upset because the lady had left them, or perhaps the gentleman himself was feeling sad. But he remembered the image of the lady sitting sweetly with the dog, feeding him and praising him for needing to eat well. L'Appel asked if he could skip the carrot this time. If he did, Lizelle promised to give him a piece of pie. The boy asked for the pie first. Lizelle thought he must have woken up on the wrong side of the bed, but since he was a good boy, he needed to eat. The cook saw the Duke standing behind the wall and noted that he was early today. He also asked if it was necessary to set the table for the Duke. The cook was about to mention the Duke's favourite dish, but Chester said it wasn't necessary because he was just passing by. Lizelle was surprised and asked the cook if the Duke had left. The cook explained that the Duke had said he was just passing by, but had been standing there for so long that he decided to ask about breakfast. Perhaps he had been embarrassed to come in because of them. Lizelle was surprised that he couldn't come in because of her, and wondered why she hadn't realised this sooner. It seemed like he was following her around like a shadow, and she probably seemed blind to him. Tia noticed that Lizelle was sighing heavily and asked if something was bothering her. Lizelle said yes and no, then asked her to take a discreet look behind her. The maid was surprised when she saw the Duke there and didn't quite understand why he was hiding. Lizelle noticed that it seemed like he had decided to devote all his time to watching her, but Tia didn't understand why. She speculated that he probably still thought she was a fraud and might even think she was capable of child abuse. Tia added that there had been many favours exchanged, so he would have sent them for something like that. But this answer surprised Lizelle. The maid wasn't sure anyone would go that far. Lizelle agreed and also wondered what other reason he could have. Tia thought that maybe he had something to say but was hesitating, or maybe he simply wanted to be closer to the boy. Lizelle realised this could very well be true. Maybe she should put her doubts aside and ask him directly. The Duke had no idea what he was doing, but then the butler approached and asked if he wanted to play with him. Chester noted that the Duke needed to be given more work to stop him from hanging around doing nothing and scaring people. Ran had just seen the gentleman standing there, looking toward Miss Lizelle. Chester explained that Dio wasn't making things up. He had simply translated them into two. The Duke blushed. Chester added that he was currently taking a walk, and if he didn't want to say something important, he could go. When the Duke opened his eyes, he saw Lizelle in front of him. It would have been better if he had stood behind the tree. Lizelle asked the gentleman if he wanted to play with them. The gentleman tried to calm down and firmly stated that he had no such desire. Lizelle then asked why he was following her like a shadow and if he really didn't want to play with the boy. The Duke was surprised by her words and asked if he could walk around his mansion since he could go wherever he wanted. Lizelle called him a coward and a liar, catching him red-handed. He still objected to her. She wished she could shove the serum down his throat right now. Now she realised that he didn't want to play. Chester didn't understand what kind of tone that was, because it sounded like she had some kind of complaint. Lizelle said that of course it wasn't so. His guest had simply forgotten his place for a moment. They continued to argue, but the butler stood between them, suggesting they calm down. Elle approached the Duke and asked him to play with him. The Duke was very surprised, but the boy kept asking. Lizelle asked Elle to come to her because he was busy following them around and couldn't play with them. Still, the Duke took him in his arms and said he would go and have fun with him. Lizelle got very angry and asked why she had answered something completely different just a couple of minutes ago. Chester noted that this was the boy's wish. It was excellent, no matter how you looked at it. The Duke had changed a lot during this time. Elle was eager to show the Duke his treasure, so he led him to his room. The boy asked him to go faster. The gentleman was surprised that the boy hadn't played enough yet. Chester had to go to work. Elle was upset, knowing this meant he wouldn't play with him anymore. Lizelle asked if everything was okay, or if he didn't consider it his wish. She agreed to let him play a little longer. Poor Duke. This wasn't the first time he'd been unable to refuse Elle, and he wasn't inferior to him in stubbornness. Only the methods were different. She felt like the Duke's wife because of these circumstances. Elle showed him the magic ball, saying that it shone very brightly.